Whatever you do, don't fall asleep. There's been a lot of talk about classic horror franchises making a comeback as animated series. And as you've probably guessed from the title, today's focus is none other than A Nightmare on Elm Street. But that's not all. There's also been official talk about a live-action reboot. The idea of a Nightmare on Elm Street remake has been floating around since 2015, with writer David Leslie Johnson originally attached. So let's dive into everything that's known so far about Freddy Krueger's potential return. The horror genre has seen plenty of reboots and remakes over the years, some successful, others not so much. Unfortunately, A Nightmare on Elm Street remake has been stuck in development limbo for what feels like forever. Despite its legendary status in horror history, there's still no confirmed release date or even a solid plan for its return. To understand why the reboot has been delayed for so long, it's important to look back at how it all started. Wes Craven, the mastermind behind the original Nightmare on Elm Street, first made a name for himself in 1972 with The Last House on the Left, a controversial horror film that pushed boundaries. However, his biggest hit came in 1984 when he introduced Freddy Krueger to the world. Unlike other slasher villains, Freddy wasn't just another masked killer. He had personality, a haunting backstory, and a terrifying ability to attack victims in their dreams. This unique concept turned the film into a massive success, launching a franchise that spanned multiple sequels, a crossover with Friday the 13th, and a 2010 remake. That 2010 remake, directed by Samuel Bayer, followed the general premise of the original but took bold liberties with Freddy's backstory. This time, Jackie Earle Haley, best known as Rorschach from Watchmen, took on the role of Freddy. While the film wasn't well received by critics or longtime fans, it still made the most money of any film in the franchise. Even so, it didn't lead to a resurgence for the series, and plans for another remake or reboot have been floating around ever since. The rocky history of Freddy Krueger reboots is a major reason why a new film hasn't come together yet. Back in 2015, reports surfaced that another remake was in development, with writer David Leslie Johnson attached, and producers like Toby Emmerich and Walter Hamada involved. By 2016, however, the project was rumored to be stuck in development hell. Even Robert Englund, the original Freddy himself, expressed interest in returning, though only in a cameo role. Later, he suggested that Kevin Bacon would be a great choice to take over the character. By 2018, Johnson confirmed that the project was still technically in the works, but Warner Bros. Was more focused on expanding the Conjuring universe instead. Fast forward a few years, and the rights to A Nightmare on Elm Street reverted to Wes Craven's estate. Since then, there have been discussions about potential pitches for both a new movie and a TV series, with Englund possibly returning in some capacity. But even with all this movement, nothing has been officially greenlit. So the big question is, does A Nightmare on Elm Street even need another reboot? Freddy Krueger is an iconic horror villain, but the franchise itself has had major highs and lows. As the sequels went on, they became more comedic and self-referential, with Freddy even rapping at one point. Yes, that actually happened. Many fans argue that unless there's a fresh, innovative take on the story, another remake might not be necessary. Interestingly, Stranger Things may have already found a way to honor A Nightmare on Elm Street without remaking it. Robert Englund's role as Victor Creel in Stranger Things Season 4 is a great example of how the horror elements that made Freddy Krueger so terrifying can still be used effectively in modern storytelling. Rather than forcing another remake, perhaps the best way to keep Freddy's legacy alive is through new creative horror projects that take inspiration from the original films. That said, Hollywood loves reboots. There's still a chance that A Nightmare on Elm Street could follow in the footsteps of Halloween and return as a direct sequel to the original film rather than a full-on remake. This approach has worked well for other franchises, bringing back legacy characters while introducing new storylines. If handled correctly, a new Nightmare on Elm Street could breathe fresh life into the series while still respecting what made it great in the first place. For now, though, it seems like Freddy Krueger is staying in the dream world. Whether that's a good thing or a missed opportunity depends on how you feel about horror reboots, but one thing's for sure, If and when he does return, it better be worth the wait. While a live-action reboot of A Nightmare on Elm Street has been stuck in development hell, another way the franchise could make a comeback is through an animated series. With so many classic franchises finding new life in animation, like Terminator, Zero, The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, and The Witcher, Sirens of the Deep. This could be the perfect way to revive Freddy Krueger in a fresh, creative way. Animation allows for endless possibilities, especially in a dream-based horror franchise where the only limit is imagination. An animated version of A Nightmare on Elm Street could take several approaches. It could serve as a complete reboot, reintroducing Freddy Krueger to a new generation with a stylized horror aesthetic. Or it could continue from the existing films, exploring different timelines and alternate takes on the mythology. Given that Freddy Krueger's world revolves around surreal, nightmarish imagery, animation would allow for the kinds of creative horror sequences that might be too expensive or impractical for live action. Looking at how other franchises have successfully transitioned to animation, Terminator Zero is a great example of how a beloved sci-fi horror series can return in an animated format while still maintaining its dark, intense tone. If A Nightmare on Elm Street took a similar approach, it could explore Freddy's origins in greater detail, diving into his past, his supernatural transformation, and how he manipulates the dream world. An anime-inspired art style could enhance the eerie visuals, making Freddy even more terrifying than ever. Another approach could be an anthology-based series. The Witcher, Sirens of the Deep expanded the Witcher universe by exploring stories outside the main narrative, and A Nightmare on Elm Street could do something similar. Rather than focusing solely on Freddy Krueger, the series could explore different dream demons, victims who have survived his attacks, or even other supernatural forces lurking in the dream realm. This would add new layers to the franchise while still keeping Freddy as the main antagonist in some episodes. Animation also allows for a more seamless connection between past and present, something The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim is doing by bridging the gap between different eras of Middle-earth. If an animated Nightmare on Elm Street series took a similar approach, it could explore the time between Freddy's origin as the Springwood slasher and his transformation into the Dream Demon. It could even bring back Robert Englund to voice Freddy, giving fans a nostalgic connection while still modernizing the franchise. A major advantage of an animated A Nightmare on Elm Street series is that it wouldn't be limited by age ratings. If the series went for an R-rated or TV-MA approach like Castlevania or Love, Death and Robots, it could fully embrace the gruesome, surreal horror that made Freddy iconic. On the flip side, an animated reboot could also serve as a gateway horror series for younger audiences, similar to Creeped Out or Are You Afraid of the Dark? This could introduce Freddy Krueger in a more stylized, slightly toned-down format while still capturing the essence of the original movies. In the end, A Nightmare on Elm Street has everything needed for a successful animated adaptation. And given the recent trend of major franchises making their animated comebacks, this might be the perfect way to bring Freddy Krueger back into the horror spotlight. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.